Well, hello everyone. This is Dr. Amigues, your friendly rheumatologist and host of the UnabridgedMD Podcast, where we bring you hope driven by science. Today, I have a wonderful guest. Dr. Stedron is a neurologist and she's also a coach. And she's mostly right now working as a coach. And what we're going to talk today, you do not want to miss. We're going to talk about how we go from a mindset of victim to getting out of this armor of glass or whatever method you want to share, imagine, and how we actually embrace our own life and how we get even better and to the better self that we all have within us. Dr. Stedron, thank you so much for being on the show. We were talking a little bit earlier how you got into being a coach, and you agreed. And thank you so much for maybe sharing something very vulnerable and very personal. Can you tell us your story?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on the show, Dr. Amigues. And you were recently on my show that hasn't aired yet. And it was such a lovely conversation. I'm really excited to share that with my listeners and yours too. So this is just feels like a continuation of our conversation. So, I am a trained neurologist. And as someone who is also a trained physician, you've done residency and fellowship not once, but twice, because you're so passionate. So you understand the high stakes and how life can make it even more challenging for us when we're trying to show up as our best selves and serve people. For me, I was in the situation where I wasn't, for a period of time, actually permitted to practice neurology. And it was expected of me and my family system that I needed to work for someone else to support that family system, which then led to me having less and less control and autonomy. And as you can imagine, you can start to feel quite caged. And the consequences for us that a lot of listeners may not understand is the longer we don't practice medicine, and it doesn't have to be long in the United States. There's more grace in other countries in Europe. For example, if you take a 3-year maternity leave, that's okay. You can do that because they understand more. I think they take a more holistic approach to you as a person. Here in the United States, unfortunately, as it stands now, if you take a year off of clinical work, it can be difficult to be credentialed and get back into the workforce, which is really tragic for the people who live here in the States, because we know that we don't have enough physicians or providers in general to meet our clinical needs. So, I think we do need to work on that policy because it doesn't really serve anyone. And it takes people who have worked really, really hard in life to become a physician. No one's lazy who goes to medical school or residency. You wouldn't make it. So it takes someone who had life circumstances lead to them stepping out of the field of medicine, and makes it really, really difficult for them to serve in the way that they want to. So here I was having to go through a lot of different things, having to, one, reclaim my sense of self enough to even take those steps, right? To get out of the victimhood that I had really become entrenched in. And it's almost like being stuck in mud. And once you get the energy to even try to get out, if your perception is that you're powerless and that you are stuck, it's like you get deeper and deeper in that mud. And so a big part of it for me was to recognize all the challenges I had, but start to reframe and reclaim my autonomy and say, I'm going to change my focus and think of what I can do to get out. And for me too, I think imagery is really important when we think about our health and our mindset, to stop seeing my condition as being in a cage, but rather to see myself as being on a hamster wheel. And that required, all of this inertia going forward. It didn't just require me to change directions. I had to stop. I had to take stock, and then I had to redirect my energy out of the hamster wheel and recognize, yes, I'm going, right? I'm trying to win this unwinnable race, but I can step off. It's not a cage. I can do that and regain my agency. So mindset work for me, which I accessed at that time because I didn't have a lot of freedom to access outside information or to even have a support system to help me do that. A big part of that for me was podcasting, listening to people who had really incredible podcasts that talked about coercive control and abuse, and also said, okay, we're going to learn what these things are, but we're not going to get stuck in the victimhood of these labels. Now we need to take responsibility for how we're showing up in this situation and make decisions about how to redirect our energy so that we can end up in a different place and again get off of this hamster wheel. And for me, once I had started to take those steps, life coaching became a really obvious and organically driven way for me to help serve people again when I couldn't serve my patients like I had for years in neurology, but I could help people who were feeling stuck to reclaim their autonomy and take their lives back. Because whether we're in an abusive situation like I was, or whether we feel stuck in a career, or whether we have a health problem like we have RA, or we have epilepsy or seizures for people who aren't familiar with epilepsy, we can treat those things with medications. But if we have certain mindsets that are really toxic and destructive to our body and our state of being, those medicines aren't going to be as helpful as they could be until we regain that energy and put it towards our healing instead of basically taking part in our further destruction. So life coaching for me was a way for me to regain my autonomy and serve others to help them through what I had just gone through in my life.
I think thank you so much, first of all, for sharing this. It's as I had mentioned, it's very vulnerable. We learn in medicine to, I don't know if that has changed, but I know that when I trained, we learned to never ask for help. Like you had to figure it out by yourself. If you wanted to sleep, that was considered weakness. If you wanted some time off, that was considered weakness. You were expected to be always there, always available, always working. And personally, for me, for my own medicine study, I actually realized that I was so much more efficient and such a better doctor in training at the time when I was taking time off. And it's like I oblige myself to never work on Sunday. And it actually takes courage to say, I'm going to do something different and I'm doing something that is not usual, because you can be controlled, or you can be controlled by outside circumstances, or you can decide, well, I'm letting myself be in control, but why? Is it because something else is telling me this? And it's really interesting because I feel that being a physician is very much being a coach. You're coaching your patients, you're teaching. I mean, that's the way I see it. I teach my patients what I know about their condition. I teach them about the new advances in science, how to read studies, things like that, and what I recommend based on the knowledge. But they have to buy in, right? And very often, one of the work that I've worked that I do, and I really appreciate that work. Actually, I find it very satisfying, is to get our patients from I'm a victim of this disease to no, actually I'm working with my body. This condition is just something that I'm dealing with, and I'm sure we've already talked a little bit of this, right, on this. When you start deciding that this is a condition, it's with me. This is not something that I'm fighting. This is something that I'm working with. You actually regain power, right? You regain power. You cannot change the fact that you may have a condition. You cannot change the fact that you potentially were in an abusive relationship. You can change how you react to it. So I wonder if you can share some tools that you see work for your clients and patients. And I'm pretty sure it's going to be a lot of the same tools that I probably use with my own patients. I'm really interested in hearing some of them.
Yeah. Well, I want to take a moment to reflect on what you're saying and the visualization, because I think one of the really key parts of coaching is to lean into visualization for me, and also to leaning into bringing people back into their body, because so much of what we are doing when we are seeking external validation, external acceptance of who we are, like we're giving our energy out of us.
Yes.
And it's almost like we're all climbing rock walls and we're imagining like, oh my gosh, we're just looking everywhere. Where's the next step? And we're getting stuck in the anxiety of like, what if it isn't there? But we weren't trained, like you said, because we were just trained to have the answers and show up and work hard. We weren't trained to ask, what do I need? Who am I? What are my strengths? We were just trained to just go, just scramble, just figure it out and survive and serve and be okay and don't get your needs met. But when we stop and just from a basic level start to recognize, who am I? What do I want? What do I need? What are my goals? And then to question those. Okay, so that's your goal. Your goal is to have your RA controlled. So if that's the goal, okay, we're going to do this medication and here are the side effects. Here's your prescription. Bye. But maybe that's not really the goal. The goal is they want to be able to bend down and play on the floor with their grandchild. Well, maybe we can help them get to that goal in multiple ways. So they have that data to say, oh my gosh, look, I'm getting closer to my goal. And then because they have that positivity and that positive forward energy in their thinking, they now have data points to say, I can do that, rather than feeling so victimized by their condition, which again, I love how you phrase it. It's a condition, not a disease. Now that allows, through maybe even part of the reason we have placebo effect that works, right? It allows them to harness that positive energy and probably make the medication work even better, right? Because we are harnessing the positive energy of their mindset. And I think that's why, and you and I have spoken about this before, working on our mindset and using those tools of bringing us back into our body, of working on goal setting, working on creating positive habits that are going to replace the negative habits that are taking us backward rather than forward on our journey towards our goals. Those are all things that should be done in collaboration with your clinical physician that you work with for your health, whether you have a chronic condition or you are fortunate enough to be at the stage of life where you're going in and checking in once a year, every 6 months, and saying everything's great. You need to be arming yourself with the best position for your health and happiness and mindset to be working on all of those things, right? Your physical health, your sleep, which we know as physicians is so incredibly important, but we are very guilty of not meeting that need, especially in training. And working with someone who helps you with your mindset, such as a coach, and often working with a therapist if there are past traumas that really need to be addressed. So you stop carrying them around like a backpack everywhere you go. And I think if we create a system that celebrates and expects you to work on your mindset as much as they expect you and celebrate that you went to the doctor once a year, then your doctor will be happier because they're really helping you and making breakthroughs in your health. You'll be happier and healthier. And I think it's just such a great system. And one of the big tools, once we get past the goal setting, which is a great place to start getting us back into our body, understanding truly what our goals are and questioning them almost to like the brink of reason. Like, why do you keep asking me what my goal is? I told you what my goal is. Well, once we get 3, 4, 5 dissections in, then we really get to the heart of the matter. And once we do that, we have to work with people on the framework of how they are approaching their goals in their mind. Because many of us, and I'm a whiteboard person. I don't know about you. I have a whiteboard behind me where I talk about what I call the butt wheel. And I see my daughter has drawn on it. I didn't realize that now. That's funny. Now it has like cute hearts and things. And she has actually taken out the backward butt, which I love because she's heard me talk about this enough. But we have the butt wheel where our thoughts can either get us stuck in the past or they can propel us forward towards our goals. So the example I've written down is, I want to grow, but I've never done this before. And I always ask people, how does that make you feel in your body when I say that? How do you feel after that sentence? And I'm going to ask you, Dr. Amigues, how did it make you feel when I say, I want to grow, but I've never done this before?
I try not to use but.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. I always try, I want to grow and I'm going to need help. Sometimes there's
So
a but, I switch it.
Yeah.
So
if we take power though of that but, if we reframe it, like we don't have to get rid of but, right? No ifs, ands, or buts about it. We can actually say, no, like questioning things is a part, but how can I reframe my question? And we say, I've never done this before, but I want to grow. And think of how does that feel? Literally the same words.
Yeah.
But we've taken back control of the directionality of our thoughts by just flipping them around and being more forward focused. Like we don't have to get rid of but can be beautiful. It really can.
That's actually a nice way to reframe that. I like that very much. I never thought of that. Thank you.
And I have to say, I learned it first from my husband, who is an eternal optimist. And when I was stuck in my old life where things were quite pessimistic and quite negative, and the party line, the general thinking in that system was that people were bad and they did bad things. But that was a projection of kind of the heads of state of that universe, of that country, that mini country that I was living in. That was what they believed. And so they were projecting that onto other people. But the truth is, it didn't have to have that tone or that meaning, but could be so positive. And my husband, I'm remarried now in a very happy marriage with a very supportive person who is more idealistic than I could ever be, despite my general idealism. And one of the reasons I fell in love with him was literally just the joy I felt in the energy of hearing him say, but, because I'd never heard that before. And I truly understood in that moment, not only for my life, but as a tool to help others, the power of the directionality of our words, and that we can take we can be in a place that's really hard and we can have very few resources, but we can reclaim those resources and use them differently for our advantage rather than to our disadvantage.
I love this. Because I can understand why you would not put a but I had never thought of, well, reframe it so that the but becomes something super positive. It's as you were explaining all of this, I have to say I was just reminded of how things comes to our mind in different ways, right? And so for some people, it's listening to the podcast. For some other people, is meeting a friend that's telling them about, this new advances in medicine or, whatnot. And it's really interesting to just hear you talk about the but, which is something that I've been trying to not use. And switching this, suddenly I'm realizing, it comes from different ways. At the end of the day, we want to go in that one direction. That's a healthy, fulfilled life, to love and be loved. That's like the big one for me. And And I really like this idea that you can use the butt. You can actually harness the power of the butt. So thank you for that. I really, really appreciate that.
Well, I think it goes back to how we work with our patients. If you have children, how do you work with your children? How do you work with your spouse if you want them to do something, right? You don't say, don't do that. You say, but like you create a positive momentum. You don't say, but don't do that, because that doesn't work. That makes people stressed. And when they're stressed, they can't perform to their best capability, right? You're literally caging them back into their limiting beliefs about what they're not capable of rather than opening it up. And when we work with kids, when we work with our patients, we don't do that well when we say you need to stop smoking, but we do really well when we get them really excited about the value of their health. So then they can decide, gosh, I'm not going to smoke because I'm going to do this instead. And it's going to take me towards my goals. And smoking is getting me in the opposite direction. And I'm working so hard to get there. I'm not willing to take that step back. We didn't help them not smoke by saying, you need to not smoke. You need to stop.
I mean, I don't have kids ready to smoke.
Or patience.
But it's pretty interesting. I keep coming back to what you said at the beginning is lean in. I think very often, and we see this in patients, a patient comes, has a problem, wants us to take it away. And so, and that's been an issue because physicians want to do good. We want to do good for our patients. So we're like, okay, we're going to take it away. And so you're taking medication, you take it away. But if or but what I have realized in the more than 20 years of practicing medicine is that, yeah, you can take it away. And you have to address what it brought. And so you've got to lean in. You've got to have, like, our patients have to lean in. What has this condition brought to you? And so if we consider, and I think that smoking is definitely a condition. And I'm a former smoker, I get it. And it's funny, I used to work at National Jewish, which is a respiratory center. And my colleagues would send me patients, not for rheumatology, but to quit smoking. Because they were like, how do you get them to quit smoking? And I was like, oh, we look at why they love it so much. And I didn't actually know that that's what I was doing. I was just telling them something that had worked for me because it took me 7 trials to quit. And so I was like, well, here's the thing. I consider myself a smoker and I'm going to be a smoker for the rest of my life. And I'm continuously quitting and I choose to quit continuously. Why? Well, because I know what smoking brings me or brought me. And I know what non-smoking brings me too, right? And I choose the non-smoking part. And so I would do that with patients. And I had patients that had smoked for 40 years quit. Some, like I had one, like 30 years. I had her for 3 years before she actually quit smoking, and she's still a quitter. She still quit smoking. But it's really interesting. It's the same thing with condition. If you have rheumatoid arthritis, just to take one of them, it does bring you something. It brings you the realization that you have to pause, that your body needs a rest, that your life is not given. And so suddenly you can, if you lean in, you can realize all of the things that this condition is bringing you so that you can let it go. Same thing with smoking. When we lean in, it's not to keep hurting ourselves. It's more like, okay, why did I don't know anything about, I don't know much about abusing relationship, but if we consider that rheumatoid arthritis is abusive, right? Like I have some patients, they have so much pain. They come and they have so much swelling and you're like, and I'm very often like, how do we still have patients like this nowadays? Like how come, right? Like our treatments are so powerful, they work so well. And just realizing that it's the lean in, like you've got to lean in, you've got to realize what those conditions are bringing to you so that then you can let them go. That and I think that's coming to this goal. What is the goal? Like if your goal is to play and have more time with your family, and maybe the rheumatoid arthritis is bringing that to you because you can, that allows you to say no to working too hard, or or
Mm.
no to your husband who's asking you to do chores in the house. It doesn't matter, right? Suddenly you have the
Mm.
power of saying no thanks to this condition. And how about you have the power to say no and have a perfect health? And to me, that's
Yeah.
what I try to work on with patients. And not everyone,
Mm.
but I find that a lot of patients need that. So, yeah.
I love this idea of gifting people boundaries, and that's so important. And you and I have come into medicine at a time in medicine where there was a transition between paternalistic medicine, where like we come in and we tell you what you're going to do, and you do it, and that's it. And if you don't do it, you're bad. You're not following. You're non-compliant. You're not following the doctor's instructions. And we came of age in our training where things were shifting and we were collaborating with patients. And that hasn't been a perfect practice over time, right? We've kind of had to figure out as a profession how to effectively do it so that we are being really good doctors, but we are also recognizing at the end of the day, the truth that always should have been at the forefront is that what really matters is this patient's goals, what they want out of life, and not, the textbooks that we read. And these are the things we're going to do to make you as good as you can be, even if maybe the side effects of the medications or the schedule that goes along with the medications or the cost that goes along, whatever it is, are going to have negative consequences to your life that overall decrease your feeling of contentment and happiness. So it's so important that we collaborate. And going back to the life coaching piece, I think being a really effective foundation for everyone, that they have a physician, they have a life coach, they have a therapist if they need it because they've got history of trauma, and that they have a support system. If we make sure that someone has access to life coaching as they're on this journey of healing and taking back that empowered sense over their health and their life and their story, it is so incredibly important to help them set boundaries. Most people don't know what boundaries are. And again, that paternalistic medicine was a real boundary violation. And it led to this kind of power clawback of almost the physician, wanting to, like, I'm going to bring you over to where you need to be. And then the patient seeking their autonomy and power and clawing that back. And maybe even almost like a teenager acting against their best interests, rather than with life coaching and with excellent doctoring as well. Doctors are wonderful teachers when given the time and opportunity to do so, teaching the patient their boundary. And once they learn the difference between me and other, my goals, my rights, and other people, then they can learn the rights they have over their treatment. They can learn that, like you were saying in your example before, I don't have to be sick to say no. I
Mhm.
can say no. And no is a complete sentence. I don't have to explain why I'm saying no, right? There are circumstances where that might be a good and connecting thing to do in a safe space. But if someone is demanding something of you that doesn't feel right and it isn't alignment, it's okay to just say no. But to get there, they have to learn those boundaries. And we can really model that as their physicians. And we know how incredibly impactful your relationship with your physician can be. It reminds me, I want to tell a really brief story. It's not a story I've shared before, but something I've wanted to. A formative experience for me as a physician in residency, inner city hospital. I went down to see a woman who had been in and out of the ER several times for similar complaints. And the ER staff was telling me that they thought that this was basically a physical complaint of a psychiatric problem, right? A manifestation of a psychiatric problem. And I went to go see the patient and do my own evaluation, taking it into consideration, but not allowing it to determine what we were going to do. And I took a quick history in the emergency room. And then I asked, I had my stethoscope and I said, is it okay if I listen to your chest? She started crying. And she took a moment to just recollect herself. And I just kind of waited and gave her a moment. And she said, thank you so much. And I'm tearing up now just thinking about it. She said, thank you so much. No one's ever asked me in the emergency room before they touched me.
Wow.
And for me, that was so incredible because that was such an important boundary for her that she had learned she didn't have the right to request. And the simple act of asking before I laid hands on a patient, which should be so standard.
Yeah.
And I think we think it's standard. We think we're doing better than we're doing. But obviously for this human being, that hadn't been her experience. And it moved her to tears that someone would respect her body. And, the details, this is a Black woman in an inner city ER, and her experience of the world was different than my experience of the world. But just by gifting her that boundary and respecting the difference between her and I, and yeah, I'm here to help you, but I have no rights to you. I'm a tool for you to use to try to help you solve this problem. I'm not here to impose myself upon you. That's not what this is. And that was such an impactful experience for me. And taking that forward in how I interact with people, when you start to feel that feeling in your chest of you're losing control over the situation, just remembering you're not supposed to have control over the situation. You just have control over you. And if we stay within our boundaries, it makes our doctoring so much better, and it makes our ability to cope with life and reclaim our stories so much more successful, and to live healthy lives because we just stay within our boundaries and don't try to control others, but we just really, really hold tight to the fact that this body and this life is ours.
I know.
And we have to protect it. Yeah.
I love it. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Cedron, and that was such a beautiful story. Would you tell us where we can find you? Where do our listener can find you?
Absolutely. You can find me at DrShaferStedronova.com. And you can also just Google Talks with Dr. Shafer, and it's spelled Shafer. And you can find me on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, all the places, and YouTube for my podcast, which I hope everyone will enjoy.
Oh, I'm sure. It was such a good conversation. Well, Dr. Cedron, thank you so much again for coming on the show. Everyone that's listening, if you found that episode wonderful as I thought it was, please share it with a friend or two, and then we will see you next week. Bye.